everyone, my name is Michelle Song, and on behalf of the Los Angeles Public Library, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for the workshop, Planning Your Retirement. This workshop is part of a series of programs for Financial Planning Week, which was made possible by the Financial Planning Association of Los Angeles. Thank you to all of our financial planning volunteers. There will be one more workshop, Introduction to Estate Planning, tomorrow at 6 p.m. The workshop will also be streamed live right here on LAPO's Facebook page and YouTube channel. Also, on Saturday, we will have free private telephone consultation with certified financial planner where you can discuss your personal finance questions. This is a pro bono service and consultations are completely free. As of right now, all appointments have been filled, but you can sign up to be added to the waiting list. To learn more, visit our website, lapo.org/financial planning. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation, but there will be a Q&A session at the end. Also, this is a public streaming program, so when you are chatting in the chat box or asking a question, be mindful of your privacy. Make sure you do not disclose any private financial information for your own safety and security. If you have more specific questions about your private situation, consider signing up for one-on-one consultations on Saturday. Now, I will hand it off to the presenter this evening, Mr. John Horn.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today and for Financial Planning Week, sponsored by the Los Angeles Public Library and the Financial Planning Association. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items on my end, mostly disclosures. Although this is a presentation that was put together by the FPA, I will try to make it a little bit more personal by adding some of the issues that come up in my practice, as well as you can tell, I'm closer to retirement than not, so some of the experiences I've had along the way. A couple other disclosures. Even though I am a registered investment advisor and certified financial planner, I am not giving financial advice. This is an educational session. Secondly, we're going to cover some legal issues perhaps that might be touched on in the presentation. And although I'm a lawyer, I'm also not giving legal advice. And then finally, there's a fair amount that has to deal with taxes, and I'm not a CPA, so you should certainly go see your tax professional when it comes to that. So moving forward, we're going to be talking about retirement planning, and let's get started. So retirement is a time of change. We all have our picture of what our retirement is going to look like, and generally it's going to be different on both a personal and a financial basis. Some of the questions that people ask on a personal level are, what's my retirement going to look like? Where am I going to live? What's my health going to be? Some of these questions we can or can't answer right now, but we can at least prepare for them. On the financial side, the biggest question is, do I have enough to retire? When can I retire? And the concern is, am I going to outlive my money? So we're going to address those in various ways tonight. In essence, there are two aspects of tonight's presentation. The first is how to save for retirement. A lot of us have heard different ways about saving for retirement. And if we work with an advisor, a lot of times the advisor is helping us continue to save and put away enough money to build a nest egg so we have a comfortable retirement. Once we get through some of the ways to save and some of the tips and techniques, we're going to also spend some time on how to create a cash flow process in retirement. This is an area that doesn't get discussed as much, and there's a lot more to it than we're going to discuss here. So hopefully this will raise some questions that you can ask your advisor or even us on Saturday or after this presentation related to how you might generate cash flow in retirement. So 2020 is unlike any year that we've had, and certainly if you go back, our generation is going through things that are much different than our parents did. And when it comes to retirement, that is not going to be any different. So if we look at the retirement scenario that we face today, as opposed to the one that our parents did, back in the day, there were more pensions, and if you expected to work at the same job for a fair amount of time, and if you spent so many years there, the company would take care of you and pay you a percentage of your salary, usually for the rest of your life. Well, we know that that isn't the case anymore, or certainly isn't as likely. So there's a lot fewer pensions, and as a result, there's more dependence on us. Now the burden is shifted from the employer to the employee to establish personal savings and investments. Other things that are different is the uncertain Social Security scenario. Depending on who you listen to or who's talking on the TV, Social Security may last decades or it may end tomorrow. Today, in fact, I heard an analyst saying that in a good investor scenario, it'll probably be around till at least 2035. So that's also assuming that the government doesn't step in and kind of fix some of the gaps that we're having in retirement. So I would say if you're getting close to retirement, it's pretty safe to say that Social Security will be around for at least a fair amount of the remainder of your life. Some other things, we're working a lot longer, whether by necessity or just because we're healthier, and we want to keep working. Also, that would lead to longer life expectancy. If you look at this chart that was put out by the Social Security Administration in 2017, you can see our life expectancy has increased significantly over the years. If you actually look back to the turn of the century, in the 20s and 30s, when Social Security was first created and then started to develop, the life expectancy was really much shorter, and the administration expected only to be paying Social Security for maybe 3 or 5 years after someone retired, as it kind of helped people in towards the final years of their life. Now, if you look at these statistics, you have a 50-50 chance of living into your 80s and roughly a 25% chance of living into your 90s. So that being said, if you retire at 65, you need to plan on roughly 25 to 30 years of potential life expectancy for which you'll need to have adequate funds. Also interesting, note that there's an asterisk saying life expectancy at age 65. People have asked me why that is, and generally, if you think about it, 65, if you look at an actuarial table, there's actually a slight little blip up in life expectancy around that time. And the reason being is if you've reached 65, not only have you made your way safely through some of the, shall we say, riskiness of our youth, but you've also tended to avoided some of the childhood diseases and other diseases that lower life expectancy. And so now you're on the path to a long and healthy, hopefully, and happy retirement. When, as a result of this long time frame, when clients come to talk to us about it, we tend to point out that there's really two phases of retirement, what we call the lifestyle phase and then the legacy phase. Lifestyle is what we traditionally think about when it comes to retirement. Do we want to travel? Will we continue to work? Will we start something else? Will we volunteer? Will we visit our kids or grandkids or our friends? So this is really how a lot of people think about what their retirement is going to look like. But because we have such a long time frame, we need to still be careful with our cash flow and expenses. In particular, we also need to maintain that nest egg, which often is what we use to throw off the income and the interest and so on to help provide our monthly or annual cash flow. And it's also important to remember that just because you're retiring and maybe your earnings might decrease, you do need to keep investing. Again, you have a long investment horizon throughout your life, and so it's important that you're still making the most of what's going on with your nest egg. Another thing to consider is also that part of that investing in the lifestyle phase would be to also invest towards a legacy phase. The legacy phase generally would start, depending on, of course, health and circumstances and life expectancy and all these other factors, but as a rule of thumb, roughly in your 80s. At this point, health maintenance takes on much greater impact and importance in your life. You start to have lifestyle changes as we don't have the physical capabilities we may have had even in our 60s and 70s. We're less likely to travel to the extent that we did, things of that nature. So what does that mean? That means other issues are going to become more important, like maintaining our health and being able to pay for it. There are some things you may want to consider in the lifestyle phase to pay for at that point to actually help you in the legacy phase. Two that come up most frequently are long-term care to provide adequate funds in case you do need help either in the home or outside the home, or maybe even have to move somewhere else to get the health care that you need. And that can be very expensive. But by planning for it ahead of time, we can defray a lot of those costs, or at least have a pool of money available to us to help take care of those expenses. Another thing that comes up is running out of money. And obviously, we don't know exactly how long we're going to last. And so we all hope we're going to last a long time, but that does make running out of money an issue. So there's other financial items, one of which being a longevity annuity, which would be something that you could perhaps purchase in your 60s or in that lifestyle phase. And those don't really start paying off until you're in your 80s. So it has plenty of time to grow and develop into what could be a comfortable income stream later on. And of course, in our legacy phase of retirement, we do want to make sure that we have our estate planning affairs in order. As an attorney, I can tell you that there are 5 documents that tend to come up in the estate planning arena. Now, we're going to talk about more of that tomorrow's presentation on estate planning. But just quickly, it's either a will or a trust, depending on your estate and how you wish to structure that. And the other 3 documents have more to do with decision making in the event of your incapacitation. So that would be a durable power of attorney, appointing somebody to make decisions on your behalf, and then specifically healthcare and financial directives. A healthcare directive would, again, in the case of incapacity, you would choose some person to make healthcare related decisions on your behalf. And the same would occur if you became incapacitated and you wanted someone to make financial decisions on your behalf. I can tell you, having seen enough stories in my life, you may want to have different people controlling your healthcare decisions than your financial decisions, but that's just me. So one of the things that we think about also is how much money are we going to need in retirement? And this is one of the first steps in figuring out if we're ready and when we can retire. Expenses can actually be less or more. They can be less in the instance that you no longer have job related costs. You may not be commuting, going to lunch, having other expenses that are related, buying, if you're a teacher, buying supplies for your class, and even buying, new wardrobe to continue to have that if that's a part of your job experience. If you've lived in a home for some time, your mortgage may be paid down, your children may be grown and out of the home, so you're not paying for college expenses and things like that. So in effect, your expenses may be less. But conversely, they may be more. And so higher healthcare costs is something that we're always going to have to be aware of, especially as we age. And then if we've lived in a home for a long time, deferred maintenance may be needed. Utility prices seem to continue going up. and property taxes certainly seem to be going up. So expenses may increase. But really where most people are surprised, particularly in those first 3 or 4 years of retirement, is when their expenses go up is due to this last bullet point: hobbies, travel, and leisure. So if you think about taking that big trip, or remodeling the kitchen, or doing something like that, well, that certainly is going to be add to your expense. But even playing golf 3 times a week instead of just on Sundays does add significantly to your monthly expenses. So what we try to do is, and as a benchmark, people tend to need to maintain their average lifestyle, because for the most part, especially after a while, your expenses will become more consistent, to estimate what you're currently earning now and try to shoot for somewhere between 75 to 100% of that pre-retirement income. It's very simple to figure out. For example, if your current annual income is $65,000 a year, and you think you can get by on the 75%, the lower end of the scale, you're going to need $48,750 a year in income to maintain the lifestyle you currently have. Conversely, if you think you're going to need a little more, and you use that 90%, you're going to need another $10,000 a year. And so a lot of this is kind of a chicken and egg issue, because how much we can spend is going to be determined by how much we have to draw from, and vice versa. How much we have to draw from is certainly going to dictate whether or not we're living in that 75-90% threshold, or have to adjust our lifestyle in one way or another. So there's lots of ways to build retirement savings, and I'm sure most people are familiar with some or all of these, and we'll go through them briefly now, and then a little more detail later on in the presentation. Employer-sponsored plans are where most of us save for retirement. These are your 401ks, your 457s, your 403bs. All those are just numbers in the code, but they all are the same type of savings vehicle, where you are putting money into a plan that has some tax advantages and is designed for your use in retirement. The next item is individual retirement accounts. These you set up on your own, and like the name says, they're individual. So a spouse and 2 spouses would each have their own IRAs. You can participate in an IRA and a 401k or some other type of plan. Conversely, they're not mutually exclusive, although the tax benefits may vary depending on which plans you're participating in. If you are a small business owner, you can create an employer type plan without going full bore on a 401k, and just enough to cover you as an individual, or perhaps you and a couple of employees. What we see most often are SEPs, which are simplified employee pensions, and simples. Can't say I see KEOs too often anymore. Another vehicle for building retirement savings through deferred taxation are annuities. There's a lot of different aspects to annuities, and so you do need to research them carefully. There's a huge variety, whether fixed or variable, when they pay off, when they not. But as a general rule, annuities are designed to have you make a single payment or multiple payments. At some point, the money grows deferred, and then it offers you a income stream for a period of years or for the rest of your life. Finally, taxable investment portfolios, and these are your accounts that you have that are not deferred, and they are things like a Schwab account or an E-Trade account, or if you work with an advisor, a portfolio that you may maintain at a bank or a brokerage house. All those fit into that taxable investment portfolios, all of which can help you save for retirement. Now, I'm going to assume that some of the viewers of this presentation are not all right at the doorstep of retirement. So let's just quickly spend a little bit of time on how things will change over time. Again, I can tell you that my plan has changed multiple times from my 20s to my 30s to my 40s and now into my 50s. And on the doorstep of my 60s, I bet you it's going to change again. But there's certain uh, rules that we can, or rules of thumb that we can use as guideposts. So if we look at that first bullet point across the top, you can see in your 30s, this is more of your investing style. So in your 30s and 40s, you can be aggressive. Why? Because you have such a long time to make up any downturns in the market. Markets do go up more often than they go down. And so it is in your best interest to stay invested for the long haul. Although, as you can see, as you get into your 50s and 60s, we need to dial back that risk a little bit. And then when you're on the doorstep, we need to dial back that risk a lot to get you into retirement. And then we kind of reshift your assets. So in your 50s, you're going to be a little more cautious in your investing. And then by the time you're in your 60s, you're actually going to be planning that retirement income cash flow. The next bullet point talks a little bit about how much to invest. Now, in your 30s, you're still entering the workforce, or maybe just spent a few years in there, and you're probably using every penny and then some, but you still want to shoot for at least 10% of your investable income to do that, to save for retirement. Why is that important? Well, a lot of it is math. There's something called the rule of 72. And what that says is if you get a 7.2% return, money is going to double in 10 years. So if you think about it, if you put $10,000 away in your 20s and never put another penny away, that's going to double. It's going to be 20,000 in your 30s and 40,000 in your 40s and so on. So by the time you're in your 60s and need that money, it potentially and likely will be $160,000, even though you started with 10 and you never put another penny away. Conversely, if you wait until your 30s and 40s to start, you're going to constantly be playing catch up. So that 10% you put away in your 30s will actually double 2 or 3 times before you need it. So it is very important to start early. As you age, you're going to see that the suggestion is that you continue to invest a greater percentage of your income. Chances are you might be playing catch up, but if not, it's still your money and you're still putting it away. One of the things that we advise clients, particularly as they do continue on in their positions, and if they get raises, we say allocate that raise maybe half into your retirement and then half into your current income. That way you get the benefit of both. You get to save a little bit more, that will be much more beneficial in your retirement, but yet you still get to enjoy the increase in your cash flow. And then again, in your 60s, you want to continue to own stock. In your 30s, you want to have a plan. As I said, it's going to change. In your 40s, you have, and also in your 30s, you do have a lot of competing interests. Are you saving for a home? Do you have kids? Are you starting to save for college? I learned one of the first things I learned early on when I got into this business was a wise person told me that banks and institutions will be happy to loan you money to pay for cars and homes and vacations even. But when you're in your 30s and 40s, but when you're in your 60s, nobody's going to help you pay for your retirement. So my suggestion is make sure you pay yourself first. So even if you get there and your kids are headed off to college and you don't quite have enough money saved up, you'll be able to get loans or some other source of income, or you may have some alternatives to help get your kids through college. Conversely, no one's going to help you pay for your retirement. That's on you. And then finally, consider long-term care insurance. We're going to harp on that a little bit again in this presentation. So here's the big tax slide that I warned you about early on. And we're going to talk about this a little bit because taxes become really increasingly more important as you age and your nest egg gets bigger, and then now you're relying on that nest egg to live, and how that money is taxed becomes very important. So there's really three ways that you can hold money: tax now, tax later, or tax never. Tax now are your typical bank deposits, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, savings accounts, any type of investments that you're doing now, where you have it in a brokerage account, it's not in a specialized account, and if you take any gains or any losses, that's going to be reflected on that year's tax return. Tax later is how most of us hold our retirement assets. These are your tax deferred accounts, your IRAs, pension plans, 401ks, 403bs, simple SEPs, even annuities. All of that usually, almost always, well, as listed here, you're going to be using pre-tax income, and you're going to be putting that into these plans, and then you're not going to be able to touch that money without penalty for quite some time. And then when you take it out, that's when you're going to be taxed on it as income. Tax never is kind of a misnomer, but what it really means is you're using after-tax dollars as opposed to pre-tax dollars that we're using in the tax later category. What makes this such a valuable bucket, and also one of the hardest one to fill, is because of the advantages that you have. If you play by the rules, there's a couple of them, but not too many. Any money that you've put into one of these investments, you'll be able to take out in your retirement years tax-free. So if you think about that $10,000 that we talked about earlier, that's doubled up to 160. If that was put into a 401k, yes, that 401k would still be worth $160,000, but every time you took a withdrawal from that 401k, it would be taxed as ordinary income. As opposed, if you had that same $10,000 invested into a Roth product, and we'll talk a little bit more about the distinctions, that $160,000 would come to you tax-free. Now, you will have already paid taxes on that $10,000 in the beginning, but that's a pretty good deal when you get down to withdrawing assets from those type of plans. So let's talk about each one of those categories briefly. Taxable investments. What's nice about taxable investments is that no contribution limits, no withdrawal rules. These are your accounts. You can add to them and withdraw from them at will and without penalty. There's of course tax implications, but they are not burdened by the type of account that you have. As a result, you're free to make any investment in these types of accounts, whether that's art, to classic cars, to real estate, Bitcoin, any of these type of investments can be made in these types of accounts. And it's a great way to diversify your portfolio. You're probably not going to be holding any of these things in a retirement account. So if you do want to invest in this is the great way to do it. Further, even though we think about our retirement accounts as what we're going to draw upon to create income in retirement, you can, obviously, this is still your money, and you can draw down these accounts as well to provide an additional income option in retirement. One of the advantages here is also the tax rate is generally if it's in an investment account, you're going to be paying either short-term or long-term gains on those withdrawals as opposed to ordinary income. So again, tax rates change constantly. As we're heading into election, we know that that's certainly one of the issues. So it's hard to forecast what the taxes are going to be like when we're retired. So again, it's always a strong case for deferring that tax. Tax-deferred plans, these are, as I mentioned, the 401ks and the other IRAs and other types of plans. So your earnings are tax-deferred, as I mentioned, and then they're taxed at your regular income rate upon withdrawal. Same is for your contributions. Those are all also tax-deferred, and so they're taxed at a regular rate rate at withdrawal there as well. How much you can put into these types of plans will vary by the type of plan. So for example, if you're under 50 years old in 2020, you can put $6,000 into an IRA, but you can put $19,500 into your 401k. So different contribution limits. If you are over 50, you can add another $1,000 to that IRA, making it $7,000 contribution, but you can add $6,500 to that 401k, making it a $26,000 contribution. So as you can see, how you are saving is going to vary in a variety of ways. Withdrawal rules also have some variability, but for the most part, any of these types of accounts, you're going to be penalized if you take money out before you reach age 59 and a half. And so you can't take it out before then, but then you have to start taking it out. It used to be 70 and a half, but now under the Secure Act, which was recently passed, they bumped the age up to 72. So you think about it, you've got that $160,000 in your 401k, can't touch it until you're 59 and a half. If you take it out early, you're going to not only pay taxes on it, but currently you're going to pay a 10% penalty on anything you take out. Conversely, if you haven't taken any money, any of that $160,000 out, by 72, you have to start taking it out. Why? Because the government wants their tax money and they want to get it now, or start getting it at this point. And so there are actually pretty serious penalties if you miss those what are called required minimum distributions, or RMDs. Here's a couple of ideas on how to make the most of your employer's plan. Of course, got to participate. Like they say in the lottery, you can't win if you don't play. So it's not going to do you much good if you don't participate. Conversely, you also want to contribute as much as you can. As long as you're not really burdening your current self, your future self will be much happier if you contribute as much as you can. You want to diversify amongst your plan choices. So not only do you might want to diversify amongst the types of savings vehicles, but within the plan itself. So I think probably everybody who has had a plan has received that enrollment form, and on there in an employer's plan, there's probably somewhere between 20 to 35 potential investments that you can pick to invest in your IRA or in your employer's plan. And it's suggested, as always, to diversify. Don't put it all into one particular choice, even if you may not understand them. If you don't, I suggest that just about every employer plan does come with a financial advisor attached. And I know I manage a few employer plans, and I'm always happy to hear from an employee to have me kind of walk them through the process, because it makes me realize that I know that they're paying attention. And that's really important. So you need to look at those choices and pick a few. Now, there is a default. If you really don't know anything about investing or don't want to know anything about investing, most plans have what are called target date funds. And in those plans, a target date fund is designed to time the investments with your potential retirement date. So, for example, if you're 40 years old and you plan on retiring at 65, you could invest your money in a target date 2045, which would then slowly, as you continue to work and get closer to that date over the next 25 years, will slowly reduce the risk in your portfolio. So it's a lot less risky when you're about to retire. Most plans will allow you to change at least annually, but a lot of times other plans will allow you to change your investments more frequently. But you do want to make sure you look at the statements and look at your plan and perhaps reallocate at least annually to see if circumstances change. For example, it's a lot different this year than it was at the end of last year. And so you never really know what's going to happen. Another example is, let's say you actually leave your job. Well, your 401k isn't going anywhere and until you do something about it. It's in both your best interest and your former employer's best interest to have you take that money out of that 401k plan or employer plan and put that somewhere else. If you have a new employer with a plan, first you want to see if they're going to allow you to roll your old plan assets into your current plan. That would be probably your easiest option. You'll be watching only one statement or however many plans you have, but that kind of puts it all together and so on. If you don't have that option, or perhaps you're not working at an employer with that plan, you can always open up an IRA and move that investment assets over into the IRA. Now you have control. The employer wants it out because they're paying fees, and you want it out because you don't really have access to that. You know it's there, but you can't make additions or changes. So it's in your best interest to roll it over. Now, if you do that within 60 days, and there's different methods of doing that, that is considered a non-taxable event, and you won't lose any of the advantages that you'd built up previously adding to that plan. Within the context of the 401k, there are a couple of mistakes that are relatively easy to avoid, and at least you should be aware of. First, of course, is failing to participate. You're not going to get any advantage if you're not participating. But secondly is not meeting the match. So back when employers were responsible for paying for pensions, this wasn't an issue. But now we have what are called defined contribution plans, which is what a 401k is. And that means that the burden is now shifted to you, the employee, to make the contribution, and you get to define how much you're going to contribute or allocate to the plan, and to a certain extent, how that's going to be invested. And so the burden is now on you. As an incentive to invest in these plans, employers often offer what's a match. So if you put in a certain percentage of deferred income, they're going to match that with a certain amount of money. So generally, or often, let's say if you put in 3% and your employer offers a 3% match, if you only put in 2% or 1%, you're really leaving money on the table. So if you're going to participate, it behooves you to, and you're not sure how much to start putting away, it behooves you to put at least up to the employer match, so you don't leave money on the table. You turn that 3% into a 6% deferral rate, and you're obviously doubling what goes into your retirement savings. Other mistakes: borrowing from the plan. Having put a couple of kids through colleges and having some other unexpected expenses, I know how easy it is to look at that quarterly statement and see that big chunk of money in there and say, boy, I could really, solve a lot of problems if I took that out. Well, I strongly suggest that your 401k is one of the last places you look to take money out. Not only does it become taxable, but if you're under 59 and a half, you're going to pay a pretty stiff penalty for that. And also, statistics show that people who borrow from their plan, that money very infrequently gets put back into it. So again, avoid borrowing from your plan. You're better off borrowing somewhere else if you can. And then the last is cashing out early. Again, that has the same penalty attached to it. So it's probably not a good idea if you can avoid it. Last are those tax-free plans, or the tax never. Now, we're not going to talk about some of the other items on that list. We're really going to focus on Roth, because that is the most common and most useful and most available for most people. There are different types of Roths. There's the IRA version as well as 401k and 403b employer plan type Roths. A Roth IRA, any individual can open as long as they have earned income. And the difference between a standard or traditional IRA and a Roth IRA is that you're contributing after-tax income. And so if you think about how that works going in, or on a Roth 401k, not every 401k plan has a Roth option. But if you do, it's another great way to get money into a Roth. So if you think about it, let's take that 3%. From a taxable basis, if you put in 3% into a traditional 401k, you would get 97% of your salary, and 3% would be put into the 401k, and then you would be taxed on that 97%. If you were to put it into a Roth 401k, or subsequently a Roth IRA, but the tax works a little differently. On a Roth 401k, you would in essence be paying tax on 100% of that salary, but they would still take that 3% out after tax and put it into the Roth version. A Roth IRA, you're using after, you're not having the money taken out of a paycheck, you're putting it in afterwards, and there you're getting a it'll just happen. You won't get the tax break because either way you're paying taxes on it, but both will result in tremendous, tax-free withdrawals when you need the money. So again, if you follow the rules, you can access that money after 59 and a half. The account needs to be open with some money in it for at least 5 years. Now, the difference between a Roth IRA and a Roth 401k, here's something that is very important. A Roth IRA has both a lesser amount that you can put in, as I mentioned earlier, $6,000 or $7,000 if you're over 50, as opposed to a 401k Roth IRA, which you can put in $19,500 or $26,000 if you're over 50. So you can put a lot more into a Roth 401k in a given year than you could into a Roth IRA. But also significant is that there are income limitations on the Roth IRA. So if you're single, if you make more than $139,000, you're going to income out of that, and you're not going to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. For a married couple, it's $203,000. Yet in a Roth 401k, there is not that income limitation. So you can make a lot more than 139, and if so, good on you. But you can still contribute to the Roth 401k. The withdrawal rules, conversely, on the Roth 401k, you are going to have to start taking it out at 72. But in a Roth IRA, you don't, since the government isn't taking any taxes out, you never have to take the money out at 72. You can leave it in there as long as you like. So here's a quick summary slide. Again, traditional, your contributions to your IRAs and 401ks are going to be in pre-tax dollars. And then, so the IRA, you're going to get the tax deduction on your tax return and so on. On the Roth, you're using post-tax dollars. Again, your earnings are going to be tax deferred in the traditional. They're going to be tax-free in the Roth, and your withdrawals, they're going to be taxed at as income when you take it out, and it's not going to be taxed when you if you have a Roth. So as you can see, the Roth is a pretty good deal, which is why it's so hard to actually get money into one. So to make the most of your Roth, another summary: contribute as much as you can, diversify broadly, and rebalance annually. Again, if you're deciding to start a Roth now, you might want to consider having a Roth, particularly if you know you're going to be able to keep the money in there for 5 years so you can enjoy those tax-free benefits. And another thing, and this is really where you do want to make sure that you seek professional tax advice, is converting your old IRAs or 401ks into a Roth. You can do that. The taxes are going to be payable at the time of conversion. But again, especially if you have a long investment window and that money is going to grow substantially, it may be in your best interest to convert old 401ks or IRAs into the Roth format. So as we look at our tax accounts, our retirement accounts, we want to look at them every year or so to look at the big picture. Are we putting enough in that tax deferred bucket or the tax free bucket? How is our money allocated? As we get older, we want to make sure we're shifting to a more conservative portfolio mix. The reason why we do that, there's something called sequence of returns risk. And that is one of the greatest risks that face people heading into retirement. And what that means is if you're starting on the road and you have your nest egg and now you're retiring or you don't have any more income coming in, well, if the market goes up, that's a good path. But if you have a bad start to your retirement and the market goes down, it's going to be tough, and then your income is going to be constrained as you try to catch back up. So we have certain techniques that we're going to talk about to minimize that sequence of returns risk. As you tend to get closer to retirement, you want to move money into investments from growth into those that generate income, such as bonds, mutual funds, other things that spin off dividends. And then finally, you do want to continue to invest part of your investment for growth because, again, you may have up to 30 years of retirement life ahead. So now let's talk a little bit about how to actually create income in retirement. And this is a simplified slide that we use as a basis for our discussion when we talk with clients who are anticipating retirement or preparing for retirement. And this is a good discussion and a real simple way to think about it. The first question that people ask is, can I retire? And so the way we look at it is we start with what's called your essential expenses. And these are, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy, this is the bottom rung. This is food and shelter, a roof over your head, food on your table, paying your basic bills. And so we want to make sure that you can cover you have enough to cover your essential expenses for the remainder of your retirement. And so what we like to see and what we like to build and create is to see if these expenses can be covered by what we consider guaranteed income or cash flow. So for some people, this is a pension. For some people, this is an annuity. For many people, this is Social Security. And if you stack those up and you can cover those basic expenses, and you know that no matter what the market does or what happens in other investment cycles, this money is guaranteed to come in every month, and you're going to have enough to cover your expenses. Well, then we can kind of start talking about not if, but when you can retire. So the next category, when you can retire, involves protection. So once we have those essential expenses covered, we don't want to have an unexpected expense blow up the whole thing. And so especially when it comes to certain healthcare and other items, we can defray or at least protect ourselves from these unexpected expenses by through the use of insurance and other types of products. So we mentioned long-term care a few times. We'll mention it again, but this is one example of having protection. If hopefully this never happens, but in the unfortunate circumstance that you have some health issues, let's say in your 70s, and you need someone to come into your home or you need to go into a home, well, it'd be very difficult if you've been budgeting with your basic expenses and now your expenses have doubled or tripled. This is where this type of protection will come into play and won't blow up your entire retirement program. So again, essential and protection, that tells us if we can retire and perhaps when we can retire. Next, people ask, or this is what people think about, are what we call the lifestyle, or what is my retirement going to look like? And lifestyle expenses are going to be funded by, in essence, what's left. So you've got your essential expenses covered, you've got your protection covered, and if we have what's left, that's going to dictate how much we can travel, how big of a retirement lifestyle we're going to have, and so on. And so the lifestyle expenses are really lower down on the rung, and we're going to finance those generally from another aspect of your total asset portfolio. Finally, is legacy, and that's in essence planning for how to pass on what is left. And there are a lot of tips and techniques that your tax professional and your financial advisors can offer to help pass along remaining assets in a more tax efficient manner. Life insurance is a great way of doing that, allowing you to spend down if you have a certain amount of money to provide for your heirs. That usually comes to them tax-free, for example. We're not going to go into that rabbit hole, but you certainly, at a minimum, want to have your estate planning documents in place, even if you don't do any necessarily any financial planning in that regard for your legacy. What are some sources of income? Well, fortunately or hopefully, we have multiple sources of income. Our savings plans, how much we're going to withdraw from that, and that's usually where most people start. As I suggested, and I do think it'll be around for a while, Social Security certainly adds a nice baseline and monthly to our retirement income. Interest, dividends, and other investment income. So if you have stocks in your portfolio or bonds that pay interest or dividends, this is all added to your income. You're going to start, rather than reinvesting, you're going to start taking that. And other investment income. This could be investment properties, to even renting a room to Airbnb in your home. These are all ways that you can enhance the amount of retirement income you have available, including part-time work. Now, whether you want to do it or have to do that, part-time work is also a great way to extend and expand your retirement cash flow dollar. And if you have to, you can also start whittling away at that nest egg as you get older, in particular, and you may need it more and more. So, if you've talked to a financial advisor at any point in your lifetime, whether you're in your 30s or in your 60s, often we're going to start by telling you you need to have an emergency fund. Now, you don't want an unexpected expense or a market downturn to totally blow up your savings and where you're headed. And so you want to maintain this emergency fund in something that is easily accessible. It's roughly in cash or a cash equivalent. In a savings account, you're not trying to earn much money. You just want to be able to sleep better at night knowing you have a little chunk of money in case something occurs and you don't have to sell something to pay for it. Normally, during your working life, we're going to tell you, if you have a one-income household, we're going to tell you to have that emergency fund be the equivalent of at least 6 months worth of your monthly expenses. If a two-income household, that's going to be 3 months, because you'll still have that other income to supplement. However, once you get into retirement, you don't have that income and it's not coming back. So we suggest an emergency fund of at least a year and potentially up to 2 years worth of expenses in this emergency fund. So now that we've built our emergency fund, what do we do with the rest to create financial income, cash flow in retirement. And there's really several strategies. These are not mutually exclusive, but these are three of the most common. And again, because they're not mutually exclusive, you can use them together, or one or two of them, or at different points you can vary. And a lot of it also depends on the variables, how much you have in your nest egg, how much you have in your retirement funds, what your needs are, your life expectancy. All of these things will help dictate how we do this, but we'll go through this pretty quick. The first is systematic. So let's say, for example, we're going to use that earlier example where we need $45,000 a year to cover our expenses upon retirement. We had a $65,000 a year, and we're going to need $45,000 to maintain our lifestyle. Well, in a systematic withdrawal process, we're going to take a regular withdrawal from our retirement accounts or our nest egg in a certain percentage. And the idea is to hopefully just take a percentage out of it so we don't really upset the corpus or the main nest egg, and we're actually living on what that generates. So let's say that person has put together a nest egg of $400,000, which if you work and put away carefully, again, if you put that $10,000 away, you've already got almost halfway there, right? But a safe ballpark number is generally 4%. So $400,000 would generate $16,000 a year. That certainly wouldn't be enough if you didn't have any other source of income, and you would have to take more. But if you were going to completely fund your lifestyle at that level, that $400,000 will last less than 10 years. You're thinking about taking $45,000 out at a time. So, but for most of us, again, Social Security stacks in. So now, if you have a Social Security payment, let's say $2,000 a month, well, that's $24,000 a year. Now that $16,000 leaves you only $5,000 shy. Do you get a second job? Are there other sources of income? But that's in essence how the systematic process would work. We're not trying to upset that corpus, because that $400,000 needs to keep generating that 4% for us to draw it down. The three bucket approach is a way to actually allocate that $400,000 into three buckets. And the reason why we do that is to avoid sequence of returns risk. So the money that we're going to need in the short term is going to be available to us, and yet allow us to invest for the long term. Let me give you a couple of examples. So you take that in the three bucket approach. The first bucket is your immediate bucket, and this is money you're anticipated to need in the next couple of years. And we suggest that in this approach, that this is you put it 4 years away, and this is put into cash and cash equivalents, just like your emergency fund. So if we need, we're trying to generate, that $24,000 that let's say we have that $24,000 in Social Security income per year, and we need to generate another $24,000. We're going to put 4 years of money into our $400,000 into that first bucket. So that's going to be $96,000, and we're going to put into that bucket. The second bucket, and we're going to draw that down each year over 4 years. That second bucket is called a short-term bucket. We're going to use this bucket to replenish the immediate bucket when it becomes empty. So after 4 years, we're going to take money from this bucket and replenish our immediate bucket, or we can do it on an annual basis, depends on your risk and so on. but we're going to put twice as much money as into that bucket as we put into that first bucket. So twice, that's $192,000 we're going to be putting into that bucket. So the two of those are going to leave a little bit over $100,000 for the final bucket. Now that short-term bucket, we're going to put into more conservative investments, things that produce an income. We're shooting for a return somewhere between 3 and 5% in that bucket. And if you think about it, we're going to be able to replenish that immediate bucket twice before we ever need to go to the long-term bucket. So in that long-term bucket, we're going to take that $100,000 plus, and we're going to invest that more aggressively, because we have at least 12 years before we're going to actually need to start tapping into that bucket. And again, according to the rule of 72, if we generate a return of 7.2% interest, or 7.2%, we're going to more than double that bucket before we ever need it. And that's how we continue to keep replenishing that money, where we're not subject to immediate market downturns, and yet we constantly have assets that are growing and available to us. The third is a baseline, and this is when you think about covering those essential expenses, we want to make sure that if we don't have enough via a pension or via Social Security or some other source of income, that we create some other way to do this, so we know that no matter what happens, again, we have money to cover our most basic needs in retirement. So the way this is often done, if we don't have those, is through a product like an annuity, which offers a guaranteed income stream for a period of years or for the rest of your life. And this is the most common way of creating that baseline. So as you can see, we can mix and match these to come up with the type of income scenario that we need based on what we have. So how do we do that? Well, in a retirement income, first, we don't have to worry about contribution limits or withdrawal rules. We're now taking money out. We're not necessarily adding to these accounts, the deferred accounts, so we don't have to mess with that. Secondly, we want to now, before we might have been reinvesting our dividends and our interest, now we want to start taking that and adding to our cash flow and letting that nest egg continue to spin that money off. We want to make sure that we're taking our required withdrawals from our employer plans and our IRAs. Again, the penalties for not doing so can be pretty onerous. We want to set a total annual withdrawal rate, which I mentioned tends to be 3 to 4%. As you get older, as inflation increases, you may need to adjust that, or you can adjust that. But again, that's a rule of thumb for planning purposes. And then if necessary, if we still need some more, we may begin to chip away at that nest egg to bring in some extra income into the household. A great way to stretch your retirement dollar, as I mentioned earlier, is to continue working past your official retirement age. Ideally, you have enough saved where you don't have to work, or if you do work, you can do it on your own. But there are lots of ways to create a little extra income, especially while you're able. You can continue with a former employer if you're allowed. You can switch to a new area of interest or do something else to generate a little bit of income. And then, of course, you need to keep Social Security income limits in mind if you're less than full retirement age, because at some point you don't want to be taxed on your Social Security income. Speaking of which, when you take your Social Security is one of the single most important decisions you can make in retirement. For most of us, again, circumstances vary by individual. It's generally in your best interest to put off taking Social Security as long as you can, at least until age 70, because your balance will grow by 8% per year. So that's a significant expansion of that monthly check if you can hold on till you're 70 before you start taking Social Security payments. Some other things to consider as we start to wrap this up. Long-term health care, I've mentioned it several times, and there's several ways to do this. You can buy dedicated long-term care policies. You can get an annuity to fund long-term care, or you can get a rider on a life insurance policy. Different ways of doing this work better for different folks. Again, you want to speak to an insurance professional or a financial advisor who can run you through the numbers and figure this out. Wills and living wills, you do that at a minimum. You do want to have these documents in place. There's no need to wait until retirement. Do it now. They should be updated frequently. You don't want to place the burden on your family to try to figure out what you wanted to have done with this, and you certainly don't want to go through the probate process and let the government decide what to do with your assets once you've passed. Estate planning, that takes into account a lot of other things, how money is going to be passed. But again, those directives, if in the event that you become incapacitated, who do you want to make those decisions on your behalf? I can say that having lost my mom to cancer, and the fact that she had a healthcare directive certainly made it easier on my sister and I and my dad to make certain decisions on her behalf when she became incapacitated. Inheritance taxes, again, are something to consider. Those are part of the estate planning scenario, and those can all be worked out at that time. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and attention to our presentation. For more information, a great place to start is at plannersearch.org. There you'll find a list of a large number of qualified financial planners. You can search by location or how they charge or what their specialties are and so on. You can even find planners that, like most of us, who offer a free initial consultation. And what is very useful is also provides a list of questions you can ask them to decide whether or not that person is right for you. So again, I want to thank you, and I hope to speak to at least some of you on Saturday and answer your questions.
Thank you very much, John. We have a couple of questions from the chat, so I'm just gonna read it to you. The first one is, you indicated to continue investing after you retire. However, I have read somewhere that you cannot invest once you are retired. Is this true?
Well, once you've left your firm, for example, you wouldn't be able to continue to invest in that firm's plan or your company's plan, but you can always invest in an investment account. So you may not be reinvesting or adding to a 401k, but you can continue to add to an IRA or any other investment vehicle for as long as you live.
Okay, and second question. An earlier slide showed in your 60s to spend down assets. Can you explain that?
Well, by spending down assets, now in essence, that's assuming you're getting retired and you're going to start, rather than, for example, as I talked about, if you're reinvesting your dividends and so on, that you're going to now want to start taking that as income. So by spending down, you're just going to want to make sure that you are taking your money out and planning for retirement income.
And we have one more question asked about annuities, good or bad?
They're very useful. They can be expensive. You need to shop around. And what's most importantly is you need to get the type of annuity that matches what you're trying to accomplish. So for example, if you want money right away to start coming to you, you're going to get a fixed annuity. So that's one that is going to be less expensive and it's going to pay an interest rate as opposed to a variable annuity that's going to go up and down with the market. So annuities, yes, for the most part, they can be very useful, particularly into retirement. There aren't too many things that are going to guarantee you an income stream for a long period of time or even the rest of your life. But you do need to be careful. Like I said, there's a fair amount of variability. And an annuity, also understand, is a contract. So there are market-based investments and promise-based investments. A promise-based investment is usually an insurance contract where you're giving money to an insurance company, and they're promising to pay you a certain amount of money for a certain amount of time or for the rest of your life. So it doesn't matter what happens in the market. The contract is between you and the insurance company. And so what's important there is, of course, the viability of the insurance company. Everything else, stocks, bonds, tulips, cars, Bitcoin, those are all market-based investments where a market determines the value. There's a lot more risk if you think about it in a market-based investment because you don't know if it's going to go up or down. So you hope anytime you're investing in a market-based investment that you're getting the return to match the risk that you're taking.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes our presentation today. Thank you very much, John, and thank everyone for joining us this evening. We hope to see you again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you. Bye-bye.